And so to this day, I still, love forms practice, but mostly in the capacity of teaching, or mostly in the capacity of practicing through feeling, as opposed to practicing through, let me show you what it looks like. And so when I got to Wudang, and my teacher, Yuan Shougang, he really pushed me a lot, because I think he saw that there was not just that kind of resource as a practitioner, a kind of inherent resource, but there was a deep yearning in me, as well as a deep necessity for it. Because I was a tough kid, man, and I was really angry back then. And he kind of needed to smash me down a few times. I mean, that's one of the last conversations I had with him when I left him after 7 years. Was the night before I left. He screamed at me for 45 minutes. And that's love. Things, everybody was quite tense by the end of training together during that time. Me and my Sadi, my younger Kung Fu brother, Louis from Taiwan, we were there for 7 years, and we were kind of itching to go, and kind of go out into the world. And Sifu just called me to his office and just sort of laid into me, just being like, I have to yell at you one more time so you don't forget. You don't forget that I'm your Sifu, and I'm always your Sifu. Your Kung Fu brothers do something wrong, I'm not even going to look at them. I'm always going to point the finger at you. And it took me some time to kind of understand that was his way of expressing his love for me, at my leaving. But one of the big things for me that really transformed practice for me was getting into practices of stillness. When I first got to China, and before that, my knees were a mess. I mean, you got to remember, I got there when I was 23, and for my knees to be as bad as they were when I was 23, I mean, that's not a good look at that age.
Is that from the skateboarding and that kind of stuff? Or?
Skateboarding, snowboarding, breakdancing, modern wushu, jumping and smashing into, low stances or splits and whatnot. And so, I would be doing kicks and I would collapse on the ground. I'd walk down the street and my leg would buckle and I would fall on the ground. I'd be clutching my knees in agony sometimes, getting acupuncture. Nothing was working. And so finally one day I just kind of implored Sifu, and I said, Sifu, like, what can I do for my knees? And he just said, you really want to fix your knees? And I said, yeah. He said, okay. And he just taught me seated meditation. And after he taught me the seated meditation, he had me doing standing meditation as well as doing Tai Chi practice. And that's a very memorable experience for me, and something that I hadn't realized that my knees were fixed until, years later, because, we don't really notice our own progress because it's in us, happening all the time. Until one day. Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, Karen.
No, go ahead.
While we're in, could you, if we were going to narrate a diary of your body during your time in Wudang, what would be the other key chapters of how your body changed, or the highs and lows of your embodied experience?
Okay. Having shown up in Wudang with ruined knees, fixing them through seated meditation and Tai Chi practice, pulling a tendon in my left leg from training too hard. Almost all of my injuries in training were from pushing myself too hard, from being impatient. That still being somewhat problematic for me. Pulling something in my shoulder, which today it's raining here in Santa Cruz, which I can feel it now. Let's see, pulling something in my mid back, which is still there. I broke my hand in 2009 in a training for a competition, fighting match. Bare hand, so that was fun. I also, something very bad happened to my hip, again from training too hard, where I woke up one morning and I couldn't walk. And that was tough. I couldn't train for 3 weeks, and I couldn't even approach trying to do chin to toe stretching for 9 months after that. breaking my nose. Where do you want to begin? You know, and that's just the physical stuff. You know?
Yeah. And training too hard is you mentioned that a lot as you were describing these
Yeah,
injuries, yeah.
yeah.
What's
Being
your
impatient.
retrospective angle on that now? Would you train too
Oh,
hard all over again, or would you approach things differently if you had those years over again?
yeah. I have no regrets about how I spent my time training in China. Zero, including still feeling some of the injuries that I have. You know, it's kind of, you know, I don't know that I can play with that question of like, would I do it that way again? I could only do it the way that I did it.
Yeah,
And yet, from all of the difficulty that I endured during that time and beyond, it's all been things that for me have helped me to uh, be able to help my students. You know, I mean, another example is, you know, my father suddenly passed away a few years ago, and you know, that's a tough one. You know, I think I was 33, 33 or something. Yeah, 33, and I was in Australia. It was very sudden, within 6 hours, and that was really hard. You know, and the grieving process is a process. You know, tomorrow is actually the anniversary, and yet during all that I went through with that, and any and all of the difficulty that I've gone through since then, all of that, I guess, you know, for lack of a better word, all of that suffering has allowed for me to gain a greater clarity on myself, on my life, to reconcile things, and also to be able to help my students. You know, to help my students and to help my friends. One of my closest students, his mother just passed away on Sunday. You know, and he's not even 30. You know, so all of those, it's very hard to kind of look back and say like, I regret that, I wish that didn't happen, because no experience is ever going to be perfect. If you're going to train in something as extreme as how I trained, you're not going to get through that without some scars. It's not possible. um, because you have to find what the limit is. And sometimes when you're that young, you don't know how to feel into the limit easily. You kind of just jump off the diving board without noticing if the pool has water in it or not. Now, you know, at, you know, close to 37, very different approach. You know, and so I have zero regret about how I did things back then. I think, you know, I might have dug a little bit too deep, but I don't regret that. I mean, it's sort of given me the ground to be the teacher that I am today, and to hopefully help my students avoid at least some of the pitfalls that I endured from my own impatience and frustration and all of that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
no regret. Yeah.
yeah. Could we move to you leaving Wudang
Yeah.
and starting the next chapter as a teacher of Wudang Arts outside of China? Could
Mm.
you kind of describe that journey up to now, and
Yeah.
what surprised you,
Mm.
what challenged you in that
Yeah.
process?
Well, you know, Giles, the funny thing is that I once heard the Western sort of wisdom tradition described as like jumping from one sure island to the next more sure island. You know, whereas you know the Chinese wisdom tradition is jumping directly into the ocean, which is just I don't know, and you know, and knowing as kind of always being a very temporary state of affairs. You know, and when I first left Wudang, I was like, okay, I trained for 3 years before I was here with a high level skilled teacher in Rhode Island. I speak fluent Chinese. I have been immersed in the Taoist tradition and Taoist martial arts for 7 years as, you know, a very close disciple of my teacher. And I think I got it. You know, I was like, I think I know what I'm doing. You know, but then I got to the West and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I didn't have a handbook for what to do, or you know, or as one of my kung fu brothers said to me when he left, he said, nobody cares that I can do chin to toe. You know, and so what I actually encountered when I left Wudang is this sort of next enormous layer of my own learning. and how through so many years of me encountering my own sort of failings as a teacher and successes as a teacher, how much that continues to temper me as a human being first, and as a teacher second, and also as a friend, and as a, you know, as a partner, all of these things. And what I've kind of really come to encounter is a sort of departure from these sort of maybe more ideological or sort of fundamental approaches that I feel like we often take when we get involved in a tradition like that. And so sort of stepping more into that idea of I don't know, and that actually allowing for my teaching to evolve in a very different way. Because, you know, bringing a tradition like this to the West, you know, I don't have a guidebook. I don't, you know, it's not like my master was like, okay, here's the book written by the 30 people who've done it before you. You know, so it's, I mean, you want to talk about jumping into the ocean, you know, just getting kicked into the deep end. And so from there, having to kind of forge your own way, while at the same time kind of just being like, well, what am I doing? You know, and yet in that, the freedom of kind of truly forging your own path, or sort of blazing your own trail, becomes very rich. And, you know, one of the things that I always try to impress on my students is integrity and humility, both of those things. It doesn't matter what you're doing as a teacher, as a husband, as a, you know, a dishwasher, a waiter, it doesn't matter. Integrity and humility, because ultimately what we're doing, you know, when we're looking at something like Taoist cultivation, is we're trying to be human. And so it might be a good idea for us to lean into what that means. And so, so much of my teaching at this point, you know, I had to go through my own trials and tribulations, you know, as people say, you know, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. You know, I think I said that one time, is if you want to make some eggs, you got to break an omelet. You know, and so I've kind of fumbled along in my own way, and yet leaning into one of the big things for me when I'm trying to teach my students is the thing about honesty. I, from the beginning of my teaching, I've tried as best as possible to simply let people know that I'm only here to share my experience. That's all I can really do. And to sort of invite my students into their own through this practice. And so, one of the things that I try to do as a teacher is to try to first find the language that my student speaks. And then from there to try to see, okay, what are we working with here? Because I don't want to treat everything like a nail. You know, I need to kind of see, what am I working with here, right? So this adaptability, you know, is a big piece in Taoist practice. And so every time I teach, whether I'm teaching my personal students and we're doing standing meditation for 45 minutes, or we're doing, you know, the world's slowest Tai Chi for 25 minutes, or if I'm teaching at the Addiction and Trauma Outpatient Center that I was at earlier this morning, I always try to get my students to engage in their own experience and to realize that the practice that we're doing is not, it's not about, hey, follow along with me. It's about, this is your practice, which means I want you to encounter yourself here. And so there needs to be a kind of honesty in that, which is something that we really encounter in seated meditation. This is a big, big part of my request, I guess I have to call it, not demand, of my personal students, is seated meditation practice. Sit, sit,